Over to you, Mr. Damodaran.
Thank you, Sucheta, for those very kind words. If this was a criminal trial, I would have pleaded not guilty at some stage, but I don't have that privilege in an awards function. I'm delighted, truly delighted to be with all of you here on this occasion for a number of reasons. One, award ceremonies are always interesting occasions. When you see those that have faced challenges, overcome obstacles, set their own high standards, and delivered to all stakeholders. And I think those are occasions when we need to appreciate, we need to applaud, and we need to hope that others emulate their track record, their conduct, their performance. I'm also delighted that this award, as Debashish said initially, is an award with a difference. He detailed the reasons why this is an award with a difference, and I will not repeat all of what he said. Suffice it to say that the process that led to the determination of the winners, determination of the shortlists, the 5 shortlisted persons who, and I associate myself with that sentiment, all of whom are winners. It just happens that 2 among them get selected out of 5, which is not to say that the others did not measure up. They did very well. And as the old saying goes, it's a Hindi expression, I don't know an English equivalent. There is not even 19-20 ka farak among these persons. I don't know how that translates into English, but I think it expresses what I'm trying to say. That it must have been a very, very tough challenge. I've been on several juries, and it has been relatively easier selecting companies because some stood out in a universe where not all of them were good performers. Some just made it because you needed some people to make up the numbers, I suspect. Therefore, you had shortlists, and therefore this is different. This is, I think, a great award. What gives me the greatest happiness, and this has been mentioned before, that in a universe comprising companies big and small, we don't have any of the usual suspects in the shortlist of 5 persons. I mean, Indian corporate history, especially in the last 2.5 decades, is witness to a number of companies that walk around as if their middle name is corporate governance. And yet when things go wrong, when all kinds of things play out in the open, you realize that perception management can last up to a point. Sooner or later, the truth will overtake, the satyam will overtake the perception management. Satyam being truth, of course. And that, I think, is a source of great personal satisfaction for me as it is for all of you. Because what this shows is that ownership is not important. It's not whether you're private or public. You can make it even if you're a public sector entity. Size is not important, and that, I think, is the strongest statement that emerged from the 5 names that you mentioned. Location is not important. Nature of business is not important. What really matters is that the corporate heart is in the right place, that you mean to do good to all your stakeholders, and you demonstrate it in every act of yours. And there is no disconnect between what you think and what you do. That disconnect between thought and word, the word and deed, doesn't exist when you're a winner in the corporate governance arena. And my compliments, not just to the winner and the runner-up, but the other 3 that made it to the list of 5, and the persons that did not make it to the list of 5, but must have been nearly there when you look at a slightly larger universe than 5. I think this is a great award that these winners bring a lot of value to from their side. It's also a recognition, a genuine recognition of the work that they have done. And as Mr. Krishnamurthy mentioned, that they will continue to do in the years to come. Let me share One or two more thoughts before I touch on corporate governance. The great thing about award functions is it reminds me personally of the statement in The Merchant of Venice about the quality of mercy, that it blesseth the giver and the receiver. So on award functions where I've been physically present and have had the privilege of giving away awards, I have seen myself as truly blessed that I had the occasion to hand over awards to winners. Some of it you believe will rub off on you before the evening is over. So even though this is virtual and that physical award giving pleasure has not been mine today, I can certainly sense what the others must have felt when they gave away the awards, both in Chennai and later in Hyderabad. I've often been asked, and I know this is a very enlightened, very informed, very involved audience. I've often been asked, what is this animal called corporate governance? We lived without it for centuries. Business was carried on, profits were made, profits were distributed. And then suddenly, where did this come from? Not so long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there were learned professors who felt that this was an item of cost. And my feeble attempts to persuade them that this is not expenditure, this is investment. The money that you spend on putting in place the processes, the structures that you need is investment. They fell on deaf ears at that point of time. The fact that other things remaining the same, the differentiator is good corporate governance, I believe is a case that has been well made within India and outside now, because we've seen companies that have reported exceptional performance on the financial front have the numbers questioned, have their practices questioned, and have their approach to the conduct of business questioned. And that, I believe, is the one major victory in the last few decades that we have gained, all of us who are in this conversation as practitioners of governance. That is something that we've been able to finally establish, that while financial performance is important, and you can't wish away that, otherwise, as it was stated already, you cannot deliver value to stakeholders, but you must deliver it in the right manner. And my very simple explanation of what constitutes corporate governance, and I know this has been defined and explained over the last several decades by committees as well as institutions within and outside the country. My simple understanding is it's about doing the right things in the right manner for the right reasons and at the right time. That's all there is to corporate governance. Anything more complicated is an unnecessary detail. If we can get these four things right, I think we are on course to say that we are practitioners of corporate governance. Some others believe that compliance and governance are synonyms. That is not an argument that I buy. I used to be, in my younger days, when I thought I was intelligent, I used to be a reasonably good chess player. And I know that the difference between playing white pieces and black pieces is that when you play black pieces, you're responding to somebody else's moves. In this case, the regulator or the lawmaker is playing the white pieces. But when you are playing white pieces, you are making the right moves. You are making the first moves, not because somebody wanted you to do it, but because you believe that that is the right thing to do for your stakeholders. That, I believe, is what sets apart true practitioners from those that tick boxes as they try and persuade the world that they're practitioners of corporate governance. I think that is something that all of us need to not just understand, but perhaps propagate to the larger audience, because unless we get that across, we are not going to see any widespread better practices of corporate governance. There was mention of the boards, and I believe that companies stand or fall depending on the quality of the boards. All that regulations and laws can do for you is to determine the arithmetic of board composition. How many executives, how many non-executives, what should be the minimum size, what should be the maximum size. these are minor details. Yes, they are important. If you had a very small board, you cannot constitute committees. If you have a very large board, then you might as well not have a board, because there will be people that don't get any occasion to raise any point of view, even if they had a point of view, if you have a very large board. But size is not the really important matter. It is the kind of people that you get into the boardroom. You must get into the boardroom people that make you uncomfortable, that ask the tough questions, that don't pull punches. I'm not for a moment saying that they must be aggressive, no, but certainly they must be assertive. And if a promoter, if a management has the courage to bring into the boardroom the kind of people that will ask the tough questions and will not accept explanations which are really excuses masquerading as explanations, and then back away without further engagement. If the relationship between the board and the management is not one of constructive tension, I believe no company will extract value from the board, and no board will extract value from the management. I'm fond of saying this, and I'll repeat this. Some of you might have heard this before. Peaceful coexistence was a very good philosophy at one point of time when India and China were pretending to be good to each other. We practiced the peaceful bit and they coexisted on our territory. I'm not expanding on that theme, but peaceful coexistence doesn't work in boardrooms. You need to be relentless in your questioning of management. In fact, that brings me to what boards should do. Boards don't have too many things to do. There are board members who believe they should roll up their sleeves and get into the pit to wrestle. No, they don't have to do that, luckily for them. All that the board has to do is to ensure that the management does its job well. Because the rolling up of the sleeves is a management function. The board's job is to see that the management does its job well. And if it doesn't, then deal with that situation in terms of, can you improve their functioning? Do you need major changes? Do you need to show the door to somebody? Those are things that boards need to be active on, but not to do the things that management does. And what happens really is that when you have any corporate scam, then directors, including independent directors, start getting into areas that are not theirs, that they're not equipped to deal with, and create further complication. I know that after the Satyam episode happened in one boardroom, one director who was actually leaning back in his chair most of the time, managed to keep his eyes open. How he did that is still a mystery, but his posture was not conducive to keeping his eyes open. He suddenly sat up straight and asked the auditors of this company post-Satyam, are you guys verifying cash balances? Does the company have the cash that it claims it has? Suddenly, all focus is shifted to cash because Satyam had non-existent cash on its book. So I think you had changes of that kind taking place. But today, the good news is, whether it is because of a better appreciation of the liabilities attached to the position, or because they have gotten to the boardrooms after some amount of thinking, hopefully, they tend to be involved in what they need to be involved in, come better prepared. In fact, I have been in a boardroom, a public sector bank boardroom many years ago, 1995, 96, where one of the directors, a very good man, God's good man, but not fit to be a director, asked the chairman. In those days, public sector banks used to have at least 10 volumes as tabled agenda and 10 volumes that they sent to you before the board meeting, invariably delivered at the airport when you landed at the station. So you were expected to read all of that. If you could read even part of those, you would have won speed reading competition, certainly. So this man, in all innocence, asked the chairman, Chairman Sahab, ye sab padh ke aana hai kya meeting mein? So we've moved from that stage where you didn't look at those as keeping the table in position, saying that the table did not fly off. So these were the heavier weights to see that the table stayed fixed. Today you have directors who read, who ask questions. And I think some of the regulations have helped. The secretarial standards which mandate the sending out of agenda items a week at least in advance is one particularly helpful measure, except that some companies even now have, I think genius is something that you cannot suppress. And some company secretariats have found the way around it. So you will get your documents a week in advance. But what it will contain after items 1, 2, and 3, which is noting of the minutes, the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting, grant of leave of absence, and the action taken report, what you will then get a number of items where it will be said, a presentation will be made during this meeting. And 7 days before you have received what passes for the agenda notes, and all that you're getting to see is a presentation will be made at the meeting. You're none the wiser as to what is going to be presented, and you get into that without getting any kind of insight into what is the nature of the proposal, if any. Is there something that is being held back? Is there suppression of vital information? You don't get any indication of that. People do get round some of these things. The other thing which I am fond of repeating is that while the agenda notes are important, and while the minutes have to be properly recorded, not a record of decisions, which is skeletal, also not a record of discussions, which is he said, she said, and it translates to almost a book if you have several items. The golden mean, which is bringing out the flavor of the discussions, capturing important items, that is something most boards now are getting to practice. Earlier, they were at either ends of the spectrum. You either had very detailed write-ups. Luckily, no comments that were of a non-serious nature found the way to the minutes, but nearly everything was there. But the most important, in my view, and companies are practicing it increasingly now, it wasn't the situation 2 or 3 years ago, is a properly constructed action taken report, which I call the control instrument for the board to decide whether the decisions that have been taken are actually being followed up by the management. Otherwise, you can go into boardrooms, you can have endless conversations, you think you've made fantastic points, come away, and that doesn't get captured in the action taken report. It is lost, there is no follow-up, and all the effort and the energy that you invested in the discussion will be completely pointless. And I would urge those in this conversation who are not looking at the action taken report as important to spend time on that. The other thing that happens, at least during the physical meetings, this is the one advantage the virtual meetings have. There are no flights to catch at the end of the day. Otherwise, in the physical meetings, as it is post-lunch and board meetings, good lunch is served at most board meetings. They're not very helpful for post-lunch discussions. And you will find that intelligent persons that structure, that sequence the agenda, will ensure that the heavyweight items are often between 3:30 and 4:30 in the evening, where in a city like Mumbai, if your meeting is taking place in South Mumbai, you're looking at the watch to see, can I make it for that evening flight? That is the thought uppermost in your mind. It doesn't matter that a very major risk management presentation is there, which might be of existential importance for the company, but your mind is already in flight mode while that matter is being discussed. These are some tricks which, no matter what regulations get written, no matter what laws get written, happen in boardrooms. And it's important for directors to see through this and say that this is not what we want. On composition, there is another interesting aspect. When it was mandated that you needed to have, initially, it was mandated that you needed to have a woman director on the board. And then it was said you needed to have an independent director who also happened to be a woman. That is the way I describe it. Because for me, the argument is talent versus tokenism. Is that individual getting on to the board to tick a box? I know some persons who were approached after this provision came, persons that I know reasonably well, who were on several boards, have distinguished themselves in the corporate area, mentioned to me that we've got this invitation. Do you think we should accept it? I said, the only way you can deal with it, you know better than I do what your time constraints are, etc. But do ask that person who invited you one question. Are you wanting me on your board to tick the box? Or do you think that, I'm going to genuinely contribute to your board? And I said, like chess players, you must anticipate the response. The response is predictable. It is going to be, no, you're going to add great value. Then please ask the second question, and hopefully the last one for the day, saying, if you thought I was going to add value, why did you wait for the regulations? You could have reached out to me before the law said that you needed to have somebody like me on the board. And even the expression that is used, even in regulations, and I find it very humorous at one level, is they use the word independent woman director. There's nothing called a woman director. A director is a director who might happen to be a man or a woman. So it is a woman independent director and not an independent woman director. There's no category called woman director in the boardroom, but that is the mindset that is sort of steeped over time, and it will be difficult to get away from that in a hurry. Then what you need to do is reconcile the conflicting provisions of the Act, the regulations, and the secretarial standards. I won't trouble you with too many details, but I'll give you one very interesting example and one that is important for the stakeholders. The 1956 Companies Act, with which Mr. Krishnamurthy is far more familiar than I am, provided that the chair of the audit committee should be present at the annual general meeting. If you are not present, there was a penalty attached to the absence. I remember on one occasion I was in the US holidaying with my son's family, and they changed the date of the meeting. And I was the chair of the audit committee. I had to fly back in order to attend that meeting. Not that the money was too much, 5,000 rupees, if I recall right. But, the shame attached to being penalized for not being present where you ought to be. The LODR makes it compulsory for the chair of the audit committee and the chair of the SRC to be present at the AGMs. And the secretarial standards say that the chairs of these committees may be present, and if they cannot be present, they can authorize another director to be present on their behalf. So you have a situation where the secretarial standards dilutes a very welcome provision in the LODR, because if directors on the boards of companies, directors that chair board committees, cannot find the time that one day in the year to be with your most significant constituency, the nameless and faceless shareholders, the big boys don't turn up there. It is the people with smaller investments and genuine questions who come there to see who are these people running my company. Who are these people to whom I should ask questions or express my reservations? And you don't turn up at that meeting because you think that that's not important. Of course, we did, as part of our survey in Excellence Enablers, we studied the attendance not just of directors, not just of committee chairs, but of the government representatives on PSUs. And while the attendance of government nominees on boards of PSUs was abysmal, and you thought it couldn't get worse, then you needed to look at their attendance at the nominees. They would send an undersecretary or a section officer to present the majority shareholder to represent, but the director would not be present because he or she was far too busy with important matters of state to be present once a year at the annual general meeting. These are things where I think organizations like Money Life Foundation should raise a voice. I'm happy for whatever it's worth to lend my support. And we should have a constituency of people that will hold directors responsible to stakeholders at least by their physical presence to start with, even if the mental presence is not there, because you can't look into their minds and see what they're thinking about, whether what preoccupies them is whether India will save the match at the Wanderers. That could be what is bothering them, but at least get them physically present. That's a good starting point for their engagement. There are 2 or 3 other thoughts, and I'm conscious of the time. I have 5 minutes more, which are very important. Post 2008, especially worldwide, regulators, especially securities market regulators, started writing regulations as if there was no tomorrow. You wake up and you write a new regulation. There is some minor delinquency by some company, you have to write a new regulation. You don't look at whether the existing regulation, if better enforced, can address that problem. And therefore, I think this matter that's been talked about, it's been a lot in conversation, very rarely practiced, should now find center stage, which is the regulatory impact assessment. Before you write regulations, see whether you need to write this regulation. Is there an existing regulation that will address it? Number 2, does it add to the cost that the last man or last woman is going to pay? Ultimately, they are the ones that pick up the bill. Everybody else is passed through. It is in the name of the investors that you write regulations, and the bill will be picked up by the investors. So before you write, see whether there is a cost-benefit analysis that you need to look at, whether an existing regulation addresses it. So the regulatory impact assessment, I think, is very important. The second is you put in place a regulation, forget about it. The world will change, the economy will change, the securities market will change, products will change. Your regulation is still there. Why? Because nobody looked at whether it continues to be relevant in the changed circumstances. To address that, I believe you need to have a sunset clause in most regulations. That this regulation will be valid for 5 years, 7 years, whatever. Pick a number. You're obliged to revisit it before that expires. Otherwise, you will not take away the regulations that are no longer relevant. And then you need what the RBI has done for the second time, and what I wish other regulators do. You need a regulation review authority. Just as the government did the good task of removing a lot of outdated laws from the statute book, I think it's important for regulators to have a regulatory review authority that takes away all of what is irrelevant today and then combines what is left into a kind of a master regulation or master circular. Because if you don't know what the regulations are, if they're all over the place, and then you're held accountable, because you cannot say that I was ignorant. Ignorance of law is no excuse. And therefore, at least they should make it easier for you to understand the law. 2, 3 other thoughts. One is our annual reports, and I wrote a newsletter on that. Apparently, some people thought it was valuable. Some others thought it was a waste of time. We pointed out all the things that we looked for in the annual reports, which we did not find. I won't share too many of those things with you. One is the non-audit fees paid to statutory auditors. Now, from Arthur Andersen Enron days, it has been believed that if your non-audit income is significant, it could impact on the quality of your audit. So we also made the right noises along the way. But the fact is, if you look at an annual report, you won't be able to figure out what is the non-audit fees paid to the stat auditors, because there is no standard way of reporting. And then if you look at the standalone and the consolidated, you will find figures that you cannot reconcile and sometimes don't make sense. So we've been struggling with this for the last few months, and we brought it to SEBI's notice. We understand SEBI is looking at it. I'm hoping sooner rather than later, we will get this, because that's critical. That is fundamental to the quality of audit. And the quality of audit is fundamental to the governance of the company. So if you're not having enough clarity on that, you will have problems. The other is the variable element of pay. of executives. If you have KRAs and if you claim that your performance determines some percentage of what is paid to you for running the company, I think the stakeholder has a right to know what that percentage that got paid, because performance in any case, he or she can look at the financials and figure out how the performance was. That is something that's missing. There are several others. I will not trouble you with those. It is exactly 7 p.m. Sucheta said at the beginning, we must finish on time, and therefore I will make only one more comment and leave it at that. I think what you have done for recognizing the genuinely good corporate governance performance is a great first step. I know some companies do what some organizations do what I'm about to tell you. But next time round, have another, which is for the most informative annual reports that are written, because we talk in terms of communication with stakeholders. This is the one document that in one place seeks to communicate. And the last thought that I have, it was said many, many decades ago, that language was given to man to conceal his thought. We should identify and name those people who have used language, complex sentences, to conceal what they should have said, but what they're not communicating because they don't want us to know. If we can get simpler language, better disclosures, more transparency, and all of that leading to mutual trust, we would have a far better corporate environment than we have at this point of time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts. This is a very large canvas, and you can paint in any corner of the canvas. There are several corners that I might have painted had time been not a constraint. But thank you for the opportunity to be part of a function that recognizes genuine winners and enables me to stand on the sidelines and applaud genuine good performance with the right intentions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Damodaran, for absolutely